Hi, I'm Billy. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Billy! We love you, Billy! Lots and lots and lots!
Thank you very much. It's working, right? Awesome. So, my sobriety date's January the 5th of 1990. My home group's For the Fun of It. That's right outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in Beaufort, Georgia. Obviously, you'll hear I have a little bit of a northern Georgia accent. We'll get to that in a little bit. You know, I live and breathe the New York Yankees, so I am from up north. I want to thank the committee for having me. It's a real honor to be here. And, you know, I want to thank Jennifer, and there's a whole bunch of people in this room that I've known for a long time. And today it's weird because it's the second time I'm speaking in a day. It was just the way the cards dealt that two people who I care a lot about had asked me to be certain places, and so hence I'm here. And this morning when I spoke was at a big regular AA conference, and, you know, the topic was, the speaker had to be somebody who got sober young, but was sober over 20 years now, and which means I'm old, right? So that's not really good, you know, because I still think sometimes I'm 24 years old, you know. I got sober when I was 23. I've been in and out of AA since I've been 14, and I'm a bad judge of age because I still think I'm young. But, you know, having a talk this morning, it's really, you know, caused a lot of things to go through my head. Because, so I'll get it out of the way that, yes, I told her to be a GSR. I think at the time I put my hand up to be the alternate GSR at the West Side Young People's Group in Manhattan in 1992. That seems like forever ago. And as a result, you know, I've been able to serve in all kinds of capacities, from corrections chair to being an area delegate, and to today being a trustee on the General Service Board and a director on the AA World Services Board. And, you know, I mention that because a lot of times when I travel, people will ask me, you know, well, has serving at that level changed you? And it has, for sure. And I'll tell you in a very simple way why it's changed me, because today's date is September 24th, 2016, and while I don't have the ability to predict the future for individuals, I do have the ability to predict the future of Alcoholics Anonymous based on the last 80 years, because today's a Saturday morning for a lot of families in the United States and all around the world. And, you know, what that means is for today, on the good side of things, there are a lot of people who are going to go to their first meeting ever. Or there are a lot of people who are going to return to Alcoholics Anonymous. And a year from now, next year, sometime at the end of the month, whether it's the last Friday or the last Wednesday or the first Saturday or whatever it happens to be where they got sober, they will celebrate 1 year sober, some of them. And as we all know, you know, year 19 doesn't look too different from year 20, and year 6 sometimes doesn't look different from year 5, but year 1 to day 0, it looks a lot different. It's an amazing transformation. And so one of the things I've learned from spending a lot of time traveling with the fellowship is that today I know that lives all around the world have been changed in a way that is miraculous, that they haven't even begun to understand. But there's another side of that coin. And that side is that this disease is so horrible, the rapacious creditor, as our literature talks about, is that last night some things happened that can never be changed. You know, our steps are powerful, our promises are 100% accurate, but we're not time travelers. There are things that happened last night that cannot be changed, ever. There are parents today all around the world who will never see their young son or daughter again. There are other people who are lucky enough to be alive, but the circumstances were so bad last night that either their health has changed for the rest of their life, or they are going to significantly be incarcerated and lose their freedom for a long time. And that's just the reality of alcoholism. You know, and I'm a huge, you know, believer in young people's conferences, you know, and I love young people in AA. And I love everything that has to do with it. I love the hijinks and the craziness and the, You know, if Jen and I wanted to stand up here and try to one-up each other on embarrassing each other, I'm sure we could. And it would get ugly quickly, okay? So I don't want anyone to think that I'm the poster child of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I am absolutely not. If anything, when I was speaking this morning, one of the things I said is, you know, as you think about getting sober young, and now that I've had a chance to sponsor a lot of young men, is, you know, one of the things you have to accept about getting sober young is it usually means that you're going to make the worst mistakes you've ever made sober. That's my story, you know? The greatest mistakes of my life I've made while being a sober man in Alcoholics Anonymous. Didn't really sign up for that, but that's what I have to report today. I also know that while there's no differences of alcoholism, you know, I love that they were referring to more about alcoholism, you know, and that we are men and women that lost the ability to control our drinking. I do know that while they're the same as far as being alcoholic, there are differences about when I sponsor young people, because most young people I meet are like me. And that means that they showed up here with absolutely no foundation in life whatsoever. Zero. You know, now, you know, my life is very different, and I'll get into that a little bit, but, you know, there was a time in my life when I liked hotels that had sand ashtrays, because when rich people put their cigarettes out in sand ashtrays, they're a lot easier to relight than the ones they step on, you know? You know, so I don't like to stand up here and tell you that I used to smoke cigarettes somebody else smoked. There was a time in my life when I used to walk into hotels in New York City and try to look decent, going by the front desk that's right over there, and make it to the elevator and push a random floor and go up to that floor around 8 or 9 o'clock at night and hope that there was some traveler who ordered some food for room service and didn't finish it and pushed it outside their door. And maybe there would be a piece of a pizza or a couple of French fries or half a hamburger. And I don't want to stand up here today and tell you that, but that's the ravage of alcoholism. That's what happens to people like us. We're forced to smoke cigarettes that someone else already smoked. I'm forced to look for food that someone else has already eaten. And, you know, the older people that I sponsor today, who got sober older, they've done things that they might as well have climbed Mount Everest, as far as I'm concerned. Like, you know, they finished high school. They went to 4 years of college in 4 years. They have done miraculous things that I could never, ever, ever do. But yet this disease struck them at a certain point in their life. But not the young people I sponsor. The young people I sponsor, you know, that's why I say, you know, I don't listen to all that ridiculousness about, you know, I've never had somebody say to me, you've spilt more than you drank. But if they did, you know, I would probably have something not so nice to say. Because the truth is, the people that I run into, the young people, they have burnt down their life in 1/10 of the time, destroyed 20 times the relationships in 1/10 of the time required, and the bottoms they have reached are just as bad. And the men that I meet, the young men that I meet, have no foundation in life. You know, and when you come here, you know, I still have an envelope at home that has all these old yellow carbon copies of money orders, because I couldn't have a bank account. There was some system that the bank had that when they entered my date of birth and social security number, it told them that I was not a good customer. Told them that I did not know how to let my balance go negative. I did not know how to not bounce checks. There was a lot of things I wasn't raised to do. So I have this envelope of all these money orders. And I look at it sometimes and I think, God, I was buying a $5 money order for 75 cents. 75 cents was a lot of money at that time. Almost 20% of the $5 I had to pay. I had to pay just because I didn't have the right to have a bank account. But I'm an alcoholic, so I had to learn that, because I'm the kind of guy, if I owe you $100, I want to wait until I have a spare 100, you know? I want to have a spare 100 and I want to give it to you in front of like 30 people, you know? Not so much when you're a young alcoholic, because it can be pretty humbling or humiliating. That you mean I'm going to have to send you $25 money orders? Because after I get rid of the basics in my life, which are a pack of 2 Newports, maybe a hot dog or a slice of pizza, I'll drink free coffee at meetings, maybe I'll get to go to the diner, and then I'll have $5 to pay somebody back who I've owed money for years. But that's the reality of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I came here, you know, very young by even today's standards. I went to my first meeting when I was in junior high, so that's even young today. And I didn't come here voluntarily. And, you know, I laugh sometimes when I think about, you know, the people who get so mad that a court or a probation officer sent somebody to AA because, you know, the next time you hear somebody say something like that, just ask them if they've ever heard of Abby Thatcher. And just ask them if a long time ago, before AA existed, if Abby Thatcher hadn't done something dumb and wound up at a courtroom in Vermont, and 2 men, Roland Hazard and Seaber Graves, showed up from the Oxford group, and they asked the judge that perhaps they had something to do with this man. Perhaps they could do with him what they could not do in jail. And that judge decided to go out on a limb and trust those 2 men. And hence we all sit here today. The first real court slip in Alcoholics Anonymous. The first diversion, if you want to use that word, to an alternative thing than just locking us up. And when you think about alcoholism and that time in the world, I mean, let's face it, in the history of the world, that's not that long ago. The 1920s, the 1930s, it's not even 100 years later yet, almost, but not. And in the history of the world, it's a small piece of time. And what were they doing to people like us back then? People like us back then didn't have a prayer. There was no billion-dollar treatment economy. I always joke around, if Dr. Silkworth ever came back to life today, he'd probably be crying. He'd realize how rich he would be today, right? You know? Back then, nobody said taking care of drunks is a billion-dollar empire. And what they did say is, in the 1920s, if you're a woman and you can't stop drinking, well, we'll let you out if you agree to be sterilized. That sounds pretty harsh to me. Or how about men that received lobotomies because they thought that would cure alcoholism? Or all the institutions in this country that locked and threw away people like me forever, that would never be allowed out again. That's what we were dealing with at that time in life, and this judge takes a chance and says, go with these people. And today, we all sit here. I mean, there's a little common phrase, seconds and inches. We all sit here as a result of a lot of miracles that all got weaved together. And when you understand the miracles that are involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, I believe you start to treat AA a little better each day. I didn't treat AA good every day for a long time in my life. But I believe the more you get to understand the miracles. I mean, let's face it, that man, Roland Hazard, if I'm sure a lot of people in here are probably more educated about the big book than I am. But you know that in the big book, they call that man a certain American businessman, I think they use that term in the big book, who goes and meets Dr. Young. And what does Dr. Young tell him when he says, am I ever going to be cured? And he says, probably not. Every once in a while we see people recover with something like with what you got. But not a lot. It's very rare. But Dr. Young believed in entire psychic changes. And because, again, I'll just throw you out a couple of things that when you run into the person who says, I hate young people, or wants to be an expert on AA history, so they weave together like their Oliver Stone history. I love Oliver Stone movies, but he usually throws a couple of things in to make it a better movie, right? The real story is not as good as when he adds 2 extra things. And so when I run into people in AA who want to tell me about young people and it's not AA and it's such a load of crap. It's history twisting in the worst possible way. Bill Wilson writes about it. He writes about the young woman that came into the office with her love beads and her miniskirt and the works. And he went out with them and had lunch, and they had just come from a young people's conference. And he said they were some of the best AAs he had ever met. And he even throws in a line, in writing, proof positive, even though they needed some of their own meetings. So if any of you need that in writing, just ask for my email after this. And I'll be glad to send you well-armed to the person who wants to scream from the rooftops. Because one thing I've had to learn is this is a program of love and tolerance. You cannot use hate and fear to transmit a program of love and tolerance. The two things are completely opposite. And, I think about, the early AA members. I was at a meeting recently in Florida that I went to randomly. And speaking that day was a 93-year-old woman at the front of the room. She started the first women's meeting in Alcoholics Anonymous with Dr. Bob right outside Akron. She was the first young mother in Alcoholics Anonymous. First young mother. And she talked about how Dr. Bob helped her start that meeting. And it was during the day. It was very odd to have meetings during the day at that time in Alcoholics Anonymous. And to hear this woman talk about the love that Dr. Bob showed her, that he knew it was important, that perhaps other young mothers don't have a place to go during the day. Perhaps they can't get out to a meeting at night. Is that our history is filled with how important young people are. And my story is no different. I love to drink. And I always say, I don't know everybody has their story. Some people say they crossed a line. I've never seen that line. Most of the other young people I meet in Alcoholics Anonymous, they've been looking for that line their whole life too. My line was like a fuse. I lit a fuse one day in the woods listening to Black Sabbath, and that fuse exploded, and it never went out. And when it did, I needed to relight that fuse. So I don't know anything about social drinking. I wouldn't be able to tell you. Today I travel a lot for work, and I see people social drink. I know nothing about it. But I have the story of what's in the doctor's opinion. In my family, which you can't run out tonight and get my family's book about raising a healthy family, because we don't write books like that. And my family does not make me alcoholic. But it comes with a lot of other garbage that has sure affected my life. The other thing I know young people who got sober young, who stay sober a long time, have in common is that we all reach a certain place. Some of us it takes 3 years, some of us 5, some of us 10. But at a certain point, you look at yourself in the mirror, and life is crazy, and you realize how crazy you are, and you wonder how you even drank to begin with. You're so crazy. Life is so hard as it is, and I'm sober. How did I ever keep a tent around this circus when I was drinking? A lot of us have that in common. And in my family doesn't believe in alcoholism. They do now. We've progressed. But when I was growing up, we don't believe in this thing. And also, my family, not all drinking counts as drinking where I come from. Just having a beer in your hand, and that's not drinking. When we talk about drinking, we're talking about going on a mission. We're talking about that although you don't know exactly how it's going to end, there is no end in sight, and that is the mission, And, I run into other young people who seem to have that same story. And they also have another thing in common that I have, which is wherever I happen to be drinking now, there's this crazy part of my brain that tells me there's something at that moment going on better someplace else. And I need to get there. And getting there has always been a problem that I'm going to get into, okay? That's another whole problem. But I like to light that fuse, so I have drank before that night in the woods, of course. Went to Jet games with my dad, split a Schaefer beer in the Shea Stadium parking lot. But that's bonding where I grew up. That's not drinking. It's what men do with their sons. I've been going to bars since I've been 5 years old. If I wanted to spend time with my dad, I had to be in a bar. I knew that every third drink was free. First time I was in a bar, like at 16 years old, without my dad, I remember being with a couple other guys my age, and when they paid for beer, they put the money in their pocket. And I remember thinking to myself, you're not supposed to do that. Like, you keep your money on the bar. You let the bartender make change. And then every third drink will be free. And I know how to get a Super Bowl box, and I know what points on a game means, and I know all the rules of darts and all the rules of how to play pool and every different game. But that doesn't make me an alcoholic either. What happened was I went into those woods listening to Sabbath, listening to Floyd, Molly Hatchet. I could go on. And that's why I'm so glad to have these Metallica design T-shirts. I have one. It's awesome. But that night I had one of those 8-packs of Miller, the old small bottles, and I had a second 8-pack that night. And I can tell you, here's what happened in my life. And I guess if you're not young, it's hard to understand. But at that point, I was not a bad kid. I was a decent son. I was a pretty decent brother, a decent student, and I'll get into that. A decent Boy Scout, good kid to have on your baseball team, but I hated myself. And after that night with those 2 8-packs and the music in the woods, and a couple of months go by, and I need to do that all the time because I've had an allergy to this thing called alcohol from that night forward, is all of a sudden my life turned 180 degrees. All of a sudden, 6 months later, my parents are not really too pleased with me. I'm not a good brother. I'm not a good student. I'm not a good Boy Scout. I'm not a good kid to depend on your baseball team. But for the first time in my life, I feel comfortable in my own skin. I like myself. So at 13 years old, I was asked to make a choice. You can have the rest of the world hate you and feel comfortable in your own skin, or you can like yourself and everybody else will hate you. Well, that's not a choice. I know 13 years old is young. I see how young it is today. But that was 13 years too long to feel like that for me. If you've not felt like that for 13 years in a row, then you have no business telling me how my drinking was or when it started or why King alcohol worked right away. Because after 13 years of feeling like that, all of a sudden, all my restlessness and irritability goes away, and this thing called King alcohol makes me feel like $1 million. And no matter, regardless of the consequences of the night before, I get up early these days. I don't know how. I still don't know how to go to bed, but I get up early. I'm working on going to bed, but I get up early. But I'm a 4 o'clock in the afternoon kind of rise and shine guy. That's kind of my preferred time to get up. Somewhere around 2 and 4 or 5 o'clock, and I like to wake up, and I like to reach for hopefully at least one cigarette left on my nightstand, and hopefully something to light it with, or I stumble out to the stove and light it. And God knows what happened the night before. And maybe I stumble out to a 7-Eleven and I need to get a new pack of cigarettes and I need to get a big gulp because my throat is killing me. But unfortunately, within an hour or two, that restlessness and irritability comes back. It doesn't matter if my mom had to bail me out that morning. It doesn't matter if the judge let me out on my own reconnaissance. It doesn't matter if I don't remember where me and my girlfriend separated the night before. It doesn't matter if there's blood on something. Nothing matters. More About Alcoholism says it. The consequences of the week or the month or the year before go out the window. Once that day goes forward an hour or two and I start to feel uncomfortable in my own skin, the only solution I know is to light the fuse again. As crazy as that is. But I had to learn that that's what makes me an alcoholic. I have the physical compulsion. I have a lot of good drinking stories. They all have in common the second drink. That's what they have in common. I cannot not have the second drink. But worse than that, the next day, regardless of what happened the night before, completely physically sober, my brain tells me that there's only one way to get rid of this kind of daily pain, and that is to start drinking again. And that's I'm a chronic, teenage, progressive alcoholic. And you know, I would tell you that if you've not gone through the big book, find somebody to take you through the big book. If for anything else, you'll know what AA is and what AA isn't. Because there's a lot of people. Believe me, there's people who travel the country who think they can take people through the steps from the podium. It's impossible. It was never designed that way. It was designed to be on a picnic table or a kitchen table or at a park or in some horrible diner or God knows where. But God hasn't given any AA member the ability to travel around and take people through the book. Maybe there are some people who can give you some ideas, but it's a one-on-one thing. Because there are things that you can hear in meetings that might not apply to you. I have a few favorites that drive me crazy. There's one that says, my worst day sober is better than my best day drinking. That's not my story. I mean, I just want to be very honest about that. There's a speaker who sometimes I'll speak with at conventions, and he hates when I say that I'm a good drinker. But too bad, I'm a good drinker, you know? I know what a good drinker is. I know what it means when I say someone's a good drinker. But that's not my story. And I can tell you, checking into a maximum custody correctional facility at 5 months sober was not better than spring break Fort Lauderdale 1986, right? Just being very honest, okay? Very honest. Don't ask me to compare days, because I don't meet anyone who shows up to Alcoholics Anonymous on a winning streak. I don't meet anyone who tells me it was just the perfect time to quit drinking. I don't meet those people. I can tell you who I've not met. I've never had somebody say to me, oh, well, 6 months ago I decided to go back to the gym, and 3 months ago I got a therapist, and last month I went to yoga, and I just thought that AA would be good to fit in this kind of life change thing I got going on. I've not met somebody like that. I meet people like me, like the people in this room. I meet people who have burnt down their entire life. Their entire life. I meet people who've been given the solution. Almost like a fireman putting a fire out. Have the hose in their hand. Know what the solution is, where to get it. But instead of turning the water on, they want to know what caused the fire. You know what I mean? They're so like me. They're worried about causes rather than the whole house is burning down. And those are the people that I meet. They have nowhere else to go. There's an old saying in the Bronx, if you have somewhere else to go, you might not be ready to come to AA. I mean, it sounds harsh, but that's the kind of people that I meet. Now, there's another saying that goes like this. There's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and a head full of AA. Now, if there's any members of Al-Anon in this room, I want to just firstly say that I have great respect for the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon family groups. I couldn't respect it more. But that's not my story. My story is there's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and my mom's head full of Al-Anon. That's my story, okay? That's my story. Because what happened one night is that I got in a little trouble again, and they have a thing called a PINS petition, a person in need of supervision in New York. And your school district can fill one out on you. And if they do, it goes to the family court. And then you have to go to court. And when you go to court, it's like an after-school special, the drug addict mom, the bulimic sister, the alcoholic dad. So there I am in court with my mom, with the social worker, with the judge, with the prosecutor, and my little PINS petition. And I have to come home, and we have to put a little contract on the refrigerator with a magnet, And it says, Billy will go to school. He won't put a pack of Marlboro Reds down the front of his pants when he goes to school. He'll come home after school. He'll do his homework. He'll do his chores. And he'll go to AA. Now, in my family, we don't go to AA. But I had to go to AA. And my mom went to the other place. And the other place taught my mom some lessons. My mom was so easy to manipulate before she went to Al-Anon. She would do anything to save my life. But then she went and met these ladies. And these ladies, they told her things like, her name is Helen, she's passed away now, God rest her soul. They said, Helen, your house has to be like a store. See, stores have hours. And hours ought to keep some order in life. And so when a store opens in the morning, the customers come in and they're ready to serve them. And then at night, the store closes. And after the store closes, it doesn't matter if you forgot something. You don't get back in. And they told my mom that our house was going to have hours. And that if people can't get home by the time they're supposed to be home, the house does not automatically open up. You're going to have to get used to your son sleeping outside in the cold or finding somewhere else to go. Then they told my mom that when I called her at 3 o'clock in the morning from a police station, that she didn't have the power. If you said there's a collect call from Billy, she didn't have the power at 3 o'clock in the morning to say no. She'd always say yes. I'll take that call. But some lady at Al-Anon told my mom that she needed to call the phone company during the day when there was no drama going on. And she needed to tell the phone company that this phone doesn't accept collect calls anymore. It's so funny how tough most of us guys are when we come here, but when you're handcuffed to a chair, you're a mama's boy, When you are handcuffed to a chair and there is some guy to your left typing on a typewriter with the old carbon paper asking you questions, you want your mom to come get you. And when you make that phone call and they tell you that phone doesn't accept collect calls, you're like, yeah, well, yes, it does. And I'm not a big fan of the word progression because I believe in alcoholism as it's laid out in the big book. It's like pregnancy. You're alcoholic. If you're alcoholic, you're alcoholic. Your bottom might get worse because every bottom has a bottom. Don't ever think your bottom's the only bottom. There's a bottom for every one of us to go after the bottom we currently have. There is. And, I think about that sometimes because my progression has been down the toilet bowl of humanity. That's been my progression. Where did I wind up? Who did I wind up with? An easy way to say to my progression is that when I was in 9th grade on Monday morning, all I thought about is where are we going to hang out on Friday night? That's the only thing I thought about on a Monday morning. That's it. When I was in 10th grade, the only thing I really thought about on a Monday morning was, I can't wait till Friday night. All these other people, they can make it to Friday night. I don't know how they can make it, but I can't make it to Friday without drinking. That's 4 days. I need to light the fuse. And by the time I was in 11th and 12th grade, I rarely went to school on a Monday morning or made homeroom for sure. That's my progression. And, I love podiums because I've yet to be arrested in the electronic age. But in the old days, there was a nice wooden podium in the police station, and it was on a slant like this, and it had a little metal clip that held a card, and they had a roller that they rolled real ink across and made it nice and thin, and they would unhandcuff you, and they would take your hand, and they would make you roll it across the page. And once you've been arrested a couple times, you know which fingers, you know when they want all four, you know when they want your thumb. But I remember when I was arrested for my first DWI, the officer saying to me, you shouldn't be driving. You shouldn't even be talking to me right now. your alcohol level is so high. And I was saying to myself, like, I'm the guy who gets everybody home. I'm the all-night, depend on me all night, keep going kind of guy. I'm not the puke that night and pass out guy. I might puke the next day, but I am an all-night, hard-charging, blackout drinker. But this cop said to me, you shouldn't be talking to me. And, I think about that sometimes. I recently had to see my arrest record because I needed to apply for a professional license in my occupation. And, they do a pretty good track of keeping track of active alcoholics, You are able to see where you were, on what date, and what somebody else says you might have done that night, right? They have good words for it. Mine is mostly obstructing governmental administration, failing to yield the lawful order of an officer, disorderly conduct, the occasional assault, a lot of DWIs. But, if you're new to AA, I just want to tell you, if you hate AA and don't believe in God, do not leave. If the only friends I had today in AA were people that came here and loved AA and believed in God, I would have no friends. If you're an Alcoholics Anonymous and you don't want to hear another person in a suit and tie talk to you, me and you are on the same page, And there's a lot of things that make sense in here but don't make sense in the outside world. Because we live in such a parallel universe than the rest of the world. It's true. It doesn't mean I blame my alcoholism on anybody. I'll give you an example. When I tell someone in the regular world that my driver's license was suspended before I had a driver's license, they have a hard time figuring that out. And they say things like, "You mean you drove before you had a license?" Now here, it's really not a big deal. Here it's kind of like, who waits to have a driver's license, right? I mean, we live in a parallel universe. Our lives are very different because of this disease and allergy that we have. Not too many years ago, I was on a business trip with two other people, 3 of us total. And we landed in this town. I had been there before, very late. We got to the Hertz dealer. I wasn't driving that night. There was one car left. It was a Shelby Mustang. Now, I've never driven a Shelby Mustang, but I've admired a Shelby Mustang. And so this guy I work with is driving, and we're heading down into Oklahoma City from the airport. And he's, I'm judging. And so I just couldn't help myself, so I just said, "Aren't you going to see what this thing can do?" Just little curiosity. And his answer is just incredible to me because he said, "I don't want to risk getting a speeding ticket." And now I'm not saying it's okay to speed when you're sober, okay? I'm not saying that. But I just want to tell you a little reality about my life. So I'm like, what at the time? 17, 18 years sober, but here's the deal. When I get pulled over, and I have a valid driver's license, and a valid registration, and a valid insurance card, all valid today, that all have the numbers that match the vehicle that I'm in. Like, for other people, that's just normal. For me, that's like Powerball, right? Like, that doesn't happen. And again, I grew up in the non-electronic age of law enforcement, so my enemy was always the dispatcher. It was never really what I just did. Yeah, what I just did might have been kind of bad in the scale of bad, but it would always go the same way. The police officer would be nice to me. I'd say I didn't have my license, couldn't find it, or I'd have a license. I'd give it to him. I'd give him my registration and insurance card if I had it. He would go back to his police car. He would pick up his radio. He would talk to some unknown person I've never met. And that unknown person would always have the same news for that officer. That there was something I was supposed to do in the last couple of months that I had failed to do. I had failed to check in with probation. I had failed to pay a fine. I had failed to do something. And I just got into this system of violations of probation. I say all the time, if I was going to write a book, which I'm not, If you're an alcoholic, if you haven't stopped drinking, well, then take the time. Because I can tell you one thing by my own experience and people that I sponsor. When we drink, we do not probate well, okay? We are not good probationary people when we're drinking. We cannot keep it all in control. And what I didn't know at a young age until a lawyer explained it to me in AA is that when I come in front of, like right here, in front of a judge sitting where I am or standing, and I promise not to do something, I didn't really understand that I was making kind of a spiritual promise. You're not going to send me to jail, and I'm going to do the right thing. I never really understood that what I was doing is breaking promises. And I got into this just vicious cycle of violations of probation. And I love to drink, you know. I love to party. And, you know, I would go to DWI school because I had a few DWIs by the time I was 18 years old. And, you know, you meet a lot of interesting people in DWI school. I don't know about North Carolina DWI school, but I can tell you about New York DWI school. It's not a good place to ask for legal advice and living advice. You know, it's a room full of people like me. And I remember being a young guy, and I remember some guy telling me, oh, you don't prepare how to drink good enough. And I was like, well, what do you mean? No one ever told me about this preparing. Like, no one clued me in on this. And he said, oh, yeah, you need to put a tall glass of water on your nightstand. You need to put 2 Tylenols there. When you come home, you need to take that and drink all the water, and you'll feel like $1 million in the morning. But like More About Alcoholism says, that seemed a lot easier than not drinking. Not drinking seemed drastic. So I would rather wake up day after day with the water spilt, who knows where the Tylenol are, a couple of empty White Castle boxes, and 2 tall boys empty from 7-Eleven that I stopped on the way home to get on the way home. But I'm going to try that again because I'm not willing to stop drinking. Or another guy that told me, try white wine spritzers. Now, I didn't know what a white wine spritzer was. Never even heard of it. You know, I'm a hard-charging, beer-drinking, do as many shots as you can, lunatic drinker. And worse than that, the later the night goes, the more that I drink, the worse than an idea is, the better it sounds to me, right? So when you tell me something at 1 o'clock in the morning that is completely preposterous, I think it's a good idea. And I'm on board to do whatever your plan is. But that's insanity. And what I learned about white wine spritzers, I can drink like 40 of them, right? That's what I learned, right? I can drink like 40 of them. But that's better than not drinking. More About Alcoholism makes it very clear. We're willing to try anything else. You know, it's interesting because in the town I grew up in, you know, so let me bring you back in age a little bit and then talk about recovery, but tell you something that's been a problem and a challenge my whole life. So when I was in 5th grade, at the end of 5th grade, there was a test, and the teacher had an extra credit question. And so I handed the test in, and I filled in the extra credit question, and the next day I was the only one to get it right. And after class, 5th grade this is, the teacher said, will you wait till after class? So I waited till after class, and the teacher said, how did you know that? How did you get that right? And I said, well, I remember like 8 months ago, back in October, we had this class, and you were telling us about this subject. And on the right-hand side of the chalkboard, about 6 inches down, you had wrote that answer. And I can see it. And I remember her telling me, you know, you might have a photographic memory. Now, what I heard her say is, you never have to do any work in school again. Okay? That's what I heard her say. Okay? I heard a very different version of what she meant to say, I guess. Because what happened is, a couple years later, I'm in 7th grade. I show up in accelerated math. At that time, I'll just tell you how I was dressed. Not like this. My uniform of the day would have been black engineer boots, Levi dungaree or corduroys, some kind of heavy metal concert T-shirt. If it was the winter, I would have a white thermal shirt under that heavy metal concert T-shirt. I had a dungaree Levi jacket with an Ozzy Diary of the Madman oil painting on the back of it. And in the winter, I had a 3/4 length olive drab army jacket with the Who Quadrophenia symbol painted on the back of it. And so that's who was in 7th grade accelerated math. And I don't know who's been in accelerated math, but I can tell you this. You know who you don't find in accelerated math? The other people I drink with in the woods, okay? They're not in accelerated math. And so there I am in accelerated math, and I'm looking around, and I'm not really liking the company, because, again, they're people that handle life very different than me. They do their homework. They do extra credit assignments. They belong to after-school activities that are official. I had after-school activities, but not official. And I always say that, I got kicked out of accelerated math in 7th grade, and I've been trying to get back in ever since, It's like the story of my life. Because I don't hang out with people like that. And it only got worse that I would take these standardized tests, and I'd get called in for meetings with my mom. And I recently saw a movie about 2 years ago, and it really kind of hit me over the head because, they'd say, oh, your son, he does so good on these tests, but his attitude is horrible. And, I just, I grew up in a very violent alcoholic house, which doesn't make me an alcoholic. And if I date myself growing up in the 70s and the 80s, back then, every neighborhood had an encyclopedia salesman. It was before the internet. And the encyclopedia salesman had different versions of the encyclopedia. Had the rich people's encyclopedia. They get like a book per letter. We weren't rich. We were blue collar. My dad was an undercover narcotics agent. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And so, but I can tell you that we had a full thing of encyclopedias. And I can tell you that by the age of 13, I had read the whole set forward to backward probably 3 or 4 times just to escape insanity. If I couldn't be in the woods, I'll read the encyclopedias. And so I've always had this chip on my shoulder that I know I'm smarter than the teachers. I'm smarter than everyone else in this classroom. I was out all night drinking the night of the SATs, and I got the 3rd highest score in my class of 400. Like this bad, bad attitude. And I say that because, when you're new and you come in, the greatest thing about having a sponsor and reaching out is that there's a lot of life learning lessons that young people need to do. I have a great career and I travel a lot, but I can tell you, I keep note cards in my pocket still. Because I was in my 30s when I learned how to study. I was in my 30s when I learned how to take notes. I was in my 30s when I learned that if I'm going to go to school with other people, I need to do what those other people do. But I never did any of that growing up. It was just completely optional for me. I think about my life, and I'll just tell you, I have 42 first cousins, Irish Catholic. My mom has 9 brothers and sisters. My dad 7. That meant that every weekend is a revolving door of first communions and christenings and confirmations. And in my household, you learn quickly that what happens in the house stays in the house. If you don't live in the house, you're not subject to the stories of the house. And every one of those family gatherings ended like a Cops episode. We know what it looks like. Just watch Cops, End of the night, mother on the front lawn, baby in half-day clothes, half-night clothes, screaming at her husband. That's how every family party ended that I went to. And that's normal. And I say that because where I grew up, even though it doesn't make me an alcoholic, what I witnessed between ages 0 and 13 should have very easily told me not to drink. That drinking's bad. That in our family, when people drink, bad things happen. But I told you, I felt 13 years of being uncomfortable in my own skin. And once somebody showed me I could drink like that, and my drinking stories never changed. I remember one time when I was going out of the country drinking, And I wasn't a guy that traveled a lot. But I remember my dad sitting me down. I told you what he did for a living. And he said, I just want to warn you, the police in other countries are not like the police here. I said, oh, yeah, I know that. He said, no, I'm just letting you know it's really different in other countries. I said, okay. You know, the next night, handcuffed in a Jamaica jail with 4 guys that I went to Jamaica with, realizing my dad knew a lot about cops in other countries than I did. But that's just the story of my life, you know, that wherever I go, I bring me with me. And like I told you, the more I drink and the later it gets, the worse the idea is, the better. That's just how I drink. And, you know, I don't think you can scare us sober. That's just my view. I don't think you can threaten us sober. In fact, if I was ever the president of my own country, my special forces would be alcoholics because, yes, I've been to many funerals and wakes, but there's a lot of us you can't kill. You know? There's a lot of us, and I'm sure you've been in meetings. I'm sure you've been in meetings and you look around and you hear somebody say, they raised their hand with 2 days back, and you can't imagine that they're still alive. Like some of us will just go and blot it out to the very end. And, you know, I didn't believe the first drink got me drunk. That sounded crazy. To me, that sounded like you weren't a good drinker. How does the first drink get you drunk? Like, I've already figured this out. The first shot after the 8th Heineken gets me drunk, okay? I've figured that out. If I could just stay away from shots, I won't get in trouble. It's these shots that are killing me. And, you know, I wound up having one of those car accidents that you hear about in the news. You know, my high school yearbook said, I predict in 20 years, and you can put in a little hokey thing about a friend of yours. And, you know, mine said Billy N will have torn every muscle in his body and broken every bone. And the other one said St. John's Hospital will dedicate a wing to Billy N. And today, you know, I used to think that meant I was cool. But today, I stand here with 1 kidney, no spleen. My ribs have been kicked in so many times because, you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I lose control of just about every muscle in my body except for my mouth. My mouth seems to work better at 3 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, so when you're getting kicked in the ribs with steel-tip boots and you're lying outside the back door of some Irish garbage pit bar in New York, and I still can't shut my mouth. I just can't shut my mouth. I have to get the last word in. And I told you I got sent to AA long before that car accident. And AA was interesting back then. We're talking the early 80s. It was a smoker's paradise. So if you were 14 years old like I was, and you dressed like I did, that meant wherever you went at school, people watched you because I had an Aussie jacket on and because I had a pack of cigarettes. And, you know, in AA, I met all these 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds who encouraged me that I could smoke openly with all of them like a civilized human being. And, you know, back then, people in AA, like, they lit a cigarette before the other one even went out. Like, they were dedicated smokers. And I would listen to people's stories, and I got the drift. You were going to tell me how your life was, what happened, and how it is today. And I could even concede with my so-called intelligence that I thought was so great that you needed to stop drinking and that your life seemed great today. However, I'm only 14 years old. I'm only 14 years old. You want to rob me of the last 15 minutes of your story. Like, I admit the end was bad, but back up a couple of years. I've not gotten to do all those things yet. I've not been to a heavy metal concert without my dad. I've not been to a Yankees-Red Sox game. I've not been to a Jets-Giants game. The list was long. You know, I remember my first anniversary meeting in a church basement with one of those like half cut out windows. And you know why I went? Because I was such a tough guy and such a punk I'm the kind of guy that sits at a table after a meeting, and if you add up all the time at the people I sit with and multiply it by 10, we don't have 9 months, right? But I'm going to tell someone time doesn't matter, right? And I'm a bully. I'm a bully since I've been born. And so I'm going to make fun of people, especially people in AA. I'm really going to make fun of them. And I'm going to point the finger at the table of people who are pathetic, whose whole pathetic life is AA. Losers in the absolute worst category in my judgment scale. And that's who I was, but I heard people talk about the anniversary meeting, and I went finally. At 16 years old, I went to my first anniversary meeting. And what happened? Some old woman, she was like 35 maybe, she turned the lights down halfway. And some other woman came out with a cake with candles lit. And all the people started singing happy birthday. And I remember sitting there like thinking, 26, 36, 46, 56, like, even if I make it to 56, like, this is it. This is what I'm going to look forward to. The last Friday night of the month, big anniversary night, with the 35-year-old lady turning the lights down and the cake with the candles on it, and that's what I got going for me. But, little did I know, and, I want to stress this, because I was in a meeting the other night, and this was the subject. And I think it's such an important line, and I don't want to mess it up. Let's see. In A Vision for You, it talks about, will our life be glum and stupid? And what I have to report to you is no. I could stand up here and do a 5-day workshop on how great the things I've been able to do that I never thought I could do. I watched the Yankees win the World Series in 2009 in Yankee Stadium, right? I did not. Do you know how many times I've been to sporting events and have been in the security office by like 5 minutes into the game? Do you know how many times I have had to not get into a heavy metal concert because something I had on me did not make it past security, and I was said I had to stay outside in the parking lot? You know how many times I've been in the Nassau Coliseum or Giant Stadium or Madison Square Garden? Because in the old days, they didn't have a lot of metal detectors, so they had all these big guys in a pat-down line. And you would go through and you get patted down, and of course, I can't go into a place with 15,000 people and think that someone else is going to take care of me getting drunk. It's like being in your parents' backyard. First time I went through the big book, really went through the big book after I met two men named Joe and Charlie. I realized, I'd heard this thing called panic attack, but I didn't know what a panic attack was. But finally, working with a sponsor, I knew something that happened to me, that if I was going out drinking on a Friday or Saturday night with my friends in high school, even if we were going to a party where there was going to be like 10 kegs, I can't go somewhere and depend on other people to take care of me. I need to make up some kind of lie. Because the ease and comfort that it talks about that the drink brings in the doctor's opinion, that ease and comfort comes to me. I like to go into your parents' backyard with a 6 of Michelob in my hand. And I like to put it behind a bush. And I like to have that keg hose in my hand. And I like to tilt that cup. And I like to feel the ease and comfort knowing that when it runs out for everybody else, I have that 8-pack of Michelob, or Miller. I like to know that. I'm the guy who, when I go to your mother's refrigerator at 12 night, 1 in the morning, I start to take 2 beers and not 1. And I put 1 in maybe the shower towel closet, or I put 1 up by the soup. I don't even care if it's not going to be cold. I just need to know that people who drink like I drink, I can't run out of booze once I start drinking. That is not a possibility. And that accident I had, and when I was sentenced and went inside and was incarcerated, and if there's anybody here who does work in the correctional facilities, I want to just say my hat and my heart go out to you. But, North Carolina is kind of intricate to my story. And I'll just tell you without giving you a lot of the war stories. I think one of the things that some of us need to admit, or we do admit, and it's not like a good psychiatric report about myself, is that I incarcerate well. I do. It's kind of made for somebody like me. Structured, has its own crazy sense of laws of the jungle. And you learn the rules very quickly. But when I got transferred to a minimum security facility, I was not doing well. So I know about myself. Again, not a good psychiatric report to give publicly. But I do maximum custody much better than minimum custody. I am not a good guy to live in a dorm with 50 other guys, okay? It's not my kind of living. I don't like to have to tie my sneakers to my cot to see if some idiot is stealing it in the middle of the night. I have way too bad a temper. I'm much better in a cell with one or two other people that opens up for a few hours a day and has a little day room with a TV. I just do better there. I know, again, not saying I'm the poster child for mental health. I just know what I know. I did not do well in minimum security, and I was, by that time, 11 months sober. But they had an AA meeting every week. And I'm dating myself. You were allowed to have a Walkman. You're allowed to have a Walkman with no AM/FM. It could only have cassette because AM/FM interfered with the guards' radios. And these people brought speaker tapes in. And I took this tape one time, and I went back and listened to it on my cot. And the speaker said, sobriety time while you're incarcerated does not count. And that really pissed me off. Because, AA is a program of experience. Listen, that's why NCCYPAA started. It started because they weren't as all blessed as we are today. If you were a 17-year-old girl going to your prom in 1957, chances are there wasn't another 17-year-old girl in your meeting or your town or maybe even your state who could tell you how to go to a prom with dignity and respect. If you were a 17-year-old kid in 1957 and you were going to college, chances are there was no one in your home group who could tell you how to go to college sober. That's why NCCYPAA started. That two men, Dennis A. and Mike M., a probation officer in Canada and an electrician in Philadelphia, got together and said, we need to have at least one time a year where young people can get experience, where they can meet someone who's gone through life as they have. So when you're living inside a facility like that that's ruled by the laws of the jungle, it's a pretty hard place to practice the 36 spiritual principles, And when I brought that tape back into the little cardboard box inside this library where we had our AA meeting, there was a tape sitting on the top of that tape. It said Tom I, Aberdeen, North Carolina. I had never been to Aberdeen, North Carolina. I never heard of any guy named Tom I. And I was pissed off at the speaker I just heard. But like most speakers I'm pissed off at, he was from California, so I can let that go today, But, I went back to my cot and I listened to this man talk about killing two people drinking and driving when he was 23 years old and becoming a warden in this state, in North Carolina. I drove my sponsor originally crazy. Someone was reminding me of my sponsor, Winston, because I used to tell Winston all the time I was going to move to Aberdeen, North Carolina. I had gotten out and I was active, and he would say, do you know anybody there? I'd say, no, but I heard this guy, and it says on the tape that he lives at Aberdeen, North Carolina. And, I remember I went to a conference, and I asked the taper if he knew this guy named Tom I and gave me his phone number. And I remember the first time I called him at his office right here in North Carolina. And I remember saying to him, I won't disclose his last name, but I said, Mr. So-and-so, you saved my life. You gave me the hope that I was looking for. And I remember what he told me. He said, I didn't save your life. He said, we have a big debt to pay here. You have to give more than you take in AA. And I'm so glad, and I look forward to meeting you. And, it breaks my heart that he's had some health challenges lately, and but I'll never repay that debt, ever, ever, ever. And, sometimes I think, Alcoholics Anonymous, I'll just leave you with a couple of things as I wind up here, is that how is it possible that in 1998, Time magazine asked the smartest history professors in the world that they wanted to know the 80 most important days in the 20th century? They didn't ask AA archivists. They didn't ask GSRs. They asked the smartest history professors in the world, what are the 80 most important days? June 10th, when you go 13 pages into that book, Mother's Day 1935, the day a broken stockbroker in New York met a broken surgeon in Akron, and from that formed the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous that has saved millions of lives and has shared their solution with others. And I have to ask myself all the time, am I treating AA like it's one of the 80 most important days? I just want to share the inside of that cover of that magazine or that book, because like every hardcover book, it has a cover, and the cover has an inside. And when you look at the other stories in that book, you realize what the rest of the world thinks of AA. But when those things happened, everybody knew they were important. D-Day, Jackie Robinson playing baseball, Martin Luther King giving his I Had a Dream speech, all kinds of things that when they happened, people knew they were important. But on the front cover of that book is an interesting little paragraph. And it says, perhaps the most fascinating dates in this book and events, however, are those that may have seemed unremarkable at the time, but proved in the long run to be of major importance. On Mother's Day of 1935, no one cared that two idiot drunks, one a stockbroker and one a drunk, and one a doctor, were going to get together in some broken-down gatehouse in Akron. No one cared. It was not big news. It was a non-event. And yet, without that meeting, none of us are here tonight. And am I treating it like it's one of the 80 most important days? Now, I'm going to close with two things, one from my mom and one from another hero I have in North Carolina. My mom died in 2000. And, I had to learn a lot of things in AA. There's a good friend of mine, Gene, here, and, I heard somebody tell a story, and it really resonated with me because, I've had to become a rower. That's been my problem. And an old-timer explained it to me. My problem with life is that life is work, and the steps are action. And that means I have to row the boat. But I get tired of rowing. That's the story of my life. And sooner or later, I look up to God and say, hey, how about letting me steer this boat for a little while? I'm a little tired of this whole rowing thing. And I've been told that God will always have the same answer to me. Of course you can steer, but I don't row, And I've had to learn that. The way you get rid of a toothache is you go to the dentist. You don't just pray for it to go away. There's action that needs to be taken. And I didn't believe in God for a long time, and I couldn't care who else in this room believes in God, doesn't believe in God. Bill Wilson wanted the doors wide open. He wanted them as so wide we can't see it. And if you think you have a drinking problem, to come in, take a bad cup of coffee, sit down in an uncomfortable chair, and find out if you're one of us. And that decision is up to you, not us. Don't let anyone tell you that that decision is up to somebody else. That decision, Bill says clearly, nobody has the right to be somebody's judge, jury, and executioner. But my mom looked right at me in that hospice with a couple of weeks to live, and she said, Billy, don't ever leave AA. She said, what AA gave me is the ability to get a quart of milk. And I said, what do you mean by that, Mom? And she said, well, when you're the parent of an alcoholic, a teenage alcoholic, and you'd run out of something at night, and you think, oh, I got to go to the store, you think, oh, if I go to the store, it's not going to be crowded because it's late. And if it's not crowded, I might run into someone I know. And if I run into someone I know and it's not crowded, they'll have time to talk to me, and they might ask me the hardest question anyone asks me, which is, how are your children? Or how is Billy? She said, so you do without. And she said what AA gives parents and families all over the world is they can't wait to go out to get a quart of milk. They can't wait to report the good news. So let me tell you about a non-famous young person from Alcoholics Anonymous in North Carolina who's one of my favorite AA members because we rarely talk about him. But he was a young man right here. There's quite a few Marines stationed in North Carolina. And the power of this book, because there was a young man named Jay from North Carolina. And in 1983, specifically June, he got sent to a place called Beirut. He left North Carolina, and with a bunch of other Marines, he took post in the Beirut airport, a young member of Alcoholics Anonymous like any of you sitting here. And in June of 1983, Jay wrote the General Service Office and said, I have no AA literature with me, and I need some. And the General Service Office sent Jay a book and a couple of pamphlets. And he wrote back a month later and said, thank you, can you send more? And so they did. And in August of 1983, Jay wrote the General Service Office again, this young man from North Carolina, this AA member Marine. And he said, I have good news to report. I started the Peacekeepers group of Alcoholics Anonymous. We got a couple of Marines and a couple of local people, and we have a meeting in between the shelling and the bombing and the fighting. And whenever we can get a meeting, we get one. And then he wrote back again one other time in September. And then they didn't hear from him for a couple of months. And in December, the office received a letter from a woman member of that group. And she said she had the heartbreaking job of informing them that this young Marine from North Carolina, this young AA member who'd been writing them, had been killed at the end of October when the 274 Marines were killed in the Beirut barracks blast. But she said she wanted to report to the office that the good news was the AA group was still going on. And I tell you that today because if you were to take out your smartphone and you were to Google AA in Lebanon, you would see that on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday nights at 8:30, there's a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I'm sure that young man named Jay, who I never got to meet, I'm sure he was buried with all the dignity and respect as a hero that he deserved. But I have this fantasy that one day I'll run into one of his family members and let them know that besides being buried as a hero, do you know that he also brought Alcoholics Anonymous to a country that didn't have it? All because he wrote and asked for this book. All because groups put a little bit of money in a basket and there's a little bit of extra money and they send it to the General Service Office in New York. All because of that. There's AA in Lebanon today. And I told you, I've struggled with God my entire sobriety. Depending on the day, ask me where I am. But do I believe in miracles? You bet your ass. But I don't believe in them because of my own life. There's a common trait amongst alcoholics. It's very hard for us to witness progress in our own life. We're thick-headed like that, it seems. But if you stay here, around here long enough, you will witness miracles in other people's lives that you know are not humanly possible. You will see things happen that have no rational explanation. And that's just the way it goes. And so if you're new here tonight, I really welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a day-at-a-time program, but that doesn't mean it's illegal to have a plan for tomorrow about where you want to go to a meeting. If you don't like where you go into meetings, try another one. Find a sponsor that has something that you have. Find a sponsor that's been through the big book. Find a group that you're committed to. And find a place where you can fellowship. You know, people talk about, we throw the term untreated alcoholism around like it's some kind of code word for they're not doing it right. Well, my experience is that's a lot of nonsense. Because you can be just as involved in the solution and not be involved in the fellowship. My experience is that people need to be around other people who are on a common path. And maybe some people like to go to the movies. Maybe some people like to go bowling. Maybe some people like to go to, I just met 11 kids. I was traveling for work. I ran into 11 sober kids who were coming back from Burning Man, okay? From Burning Man. And they told me about the sober camp at Burning Man. The world is at your fingertips. And I'll close with his quote. The problem with the world being at your fingertips for people like us is the enemy, the arch enemy of the recovered alcoholic, which is the ego, the alcoholic ego. We can do anything we want except for taking one single drink. We've been given power to do everything, to have the greatest lives in the world. But I don't have the power over one single drink. That one drink can take everything away. So I want to thank you for having me out tonight, and I want to congratulate North Carolina on that 20th Young People's Conference. And I want to ask you that if you run into anyone that was at the first one, whether it's here or somewhere else, I just want to let you know that it wasn't always this easy. It wasn't always this cooperative. It wasn't always this kind of relationship between the rest of AA and young people's. And those people that did this 20 years ago, it did not come without pain and heartache and a lot of other things. And as a result, look what we have here tonight. So many hundreds of people here to celebrate your 20th conference. Thank you very much.